All right, let's talk about something that's been making the rounds online, and frankly, it's pretty concerning. Is there a real link between COVID-19 vaccines and cancer? It's a heavy question, and it's one that deserves a really clear, fact-based answer. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to dive into the evidence and see what it really says.
I mean, some of the things you see online are incredibly dramatic, like this quote here suggesting vaccines will create living dead. Wow. And that, along with some really specific worries, about things like leukemia or pancreatic cancer, it's understandably caused a whole lot of anxiety. So our mission today is pretty simple. Let's cut through the noise, separate the fear from the facts, and just look at the actual evidence.
So, with a question this huge, where do you even begin? Well, the best place to start is with the big picture. We need to look at the massive global safety nets that were set up to watch over these vaccines on a scale we've never seen before.
I mean, it's a perfectly fair question, right? When you give a medicine to literally billions of people all around the world, how on earth do you keep track of what's happening? How do you tell if something is a real side effect or just a coincidence? Well, turns out there are systems for that.
And we're not just talking about one little database. This is a whole web of powerful systems. Here in the US, you've got things like VAERS and the Vaccine Safety Data Link. You can think of them like 24/7 watchtowers, constantly scanning health data from millions and millions of people, always on the lookout for even the tiniest little signal that something might be wrong.
And here's where you see just how sharp these systems are. They are so incredibly sensitive that they were able to pinpoint very, very rare side effects, like myocarditis, which happens in fewer than 1 in 200,000 people who get the vaccine. Think about that. It just proves that this safety net is actually working. It can catch even these super infrequent events.
So, here's the crucial takeaway. If these global systems are sharp enough to detect a 1 in 200,000 problem, their total silence on something as major as a widespread increase in cancer, well, that's not just silence. It's incredibly meaningful. After all this time and all this monitoring, they have found absolutely no link.
Okay, so we've got the 30,000-foot view. The big picture looks clear. But now let's zoom in and tackle those specific claims that are floating around head-on. Because it's one thing to talk about cancer in general, but it's another to really address the fears people have about specific types, like leukemia and pancreatic cancer.
So the first big claim you probably heard is that the vaccines are somehow causing a spike in leukemia. And you can kind of see why people might worry. Leukemia is a cancer of the blood, the vaccine works with your immune system, but what does the actual evidence say?
Well, when we look at the data, a really clear picture starts to form. You have a huge study from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. They looked at more than 1,400 blood cancer patients, and their conclusion? The vaccines are both safe and protective for them. Then another big study found the vast majority of patients with these kinds of cancers developed antibodies. And all of this is why major health organizations like the CDC and the National Cancer Institute actually recommend the vaccine for cancer patients.
Okay, what about the other really specific claim that's been making the rounds? This one targets pancreatic cancer, especially in men. Again, it sounds terrifying. So let's take a close look at the research.
And this is one of those cases where you really have to look at the details, because this is where things get twisted online. On one hand, you have a 2024 study from the Netherlands that was super clear. The vaccines are safe and effective for patients with pancreatic cancer. Simple enough. But then there's a Japanese study that sometimes gets used as proof for the claim, but it's been completely misinterpreted. That study did not find that vaccines cause cancer, not even close. What it did was suggest a possible link to a worse outcome for people who already had the disease, and that's a totally different scientific question than whether the vaccine can cause cancer in the first place.
Okay, so we've seen that the huge population-level data just doesn't support the claim. But let's go a level deeper. What about the basic science of it all? Is it even plausible that an mRNA vaccine could cause cancer to begin with?
Let's do a quick breakdown of what an mRNA vaccine actually is. The easiest way to think about it is like a temporary instruction manual for your immune system. It gives your cells a quick recipe so they know how to recognize and fight off the virus. But here's the absolute key. It delivers this message outside of your cell's main control center, the nucleus. That's where your DNA is stored. The mRNA never goes in there, and it never, ever interacts with your DNA.
The process is actually pretty slick and straightforward. First, the instructions get delivered. Second, your body uses those instructions to build up its defenses. And then third, and this is the critical part, your body's natural systems just break down and destroy the instructions. The blueprint doesn't stick around. It's temporary. And since cancer is fundamentally a disease of mutations in our DNA, a mechanism that never even touches our DNA just can't cause it. It's biologically not possible.
So, we've looked at the global data,
we've dug into the specific cancer claims, and we've reviewed the basic science. So let's put it all together. Let's look at the final verdict when we put data over fear.
Just take a second and look at this number. Over 5 billion people around the world have gotten a COVID-19 vaccine. That is not a small sample size. This is one of the biggest sets of public health safety data in the entire history of humanity.
So, when you put it all together, the global surveillance systems, the studies on specific cancers, and the fundamental biology of how these vaccines work, the conclusion from the scientific community is just crystal clear. The data does not support the claim. These claims are false. You know, this whole issue really shines a light on a much bigger challenge that we all face every day, doesn't it? We are swimming in an ocean of information, and it can feel impossible to figure out what's true. Maybe the biggest takeaway here isn't just about vaccines at all, it's about the tools we need to find answers, following the data, understanding the science, and putting our trust in credible evidence. In a world full of noise, that's really the only compass we've got. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.